You know, most of us who follow Jesus probably think we have a pretty good grip on what he taught. But what if I told you that Jesus himself pointed to one single story, one specific parable, as the absolute master key to understanding everything else he ever said?
I mean, just listen to that. He wasn't just suggesting this was important. He was basically saying, look, if you don't get this one story, you're going to miss the point of all the others. The weight of that statement is just staggering. This isn't just another nice story, it's the very foundation for everything else.
So that's the big question, right? What is this parable that acts like a master key, unlocking the secrets of God's kingdom? And maybe more to the point, do we really truly understand it the way he intended?
Okay, let's dive right in. The parable is the one we all know as the parable of the sower. But I want you to just for a moment push aside any Sunday school images you might have in your head. This is not a quaint little story about farming. Jesus told this story as a kind of spiritual EKG, a diagnosis of the human heart.
He pulls back the curtain and shows us that in any group of people hearing a message from God, there are really only four types of hearts, four distinct spiritual conditions. Now, they all hear the exact same words, but the outcomes? They couldn't be more different. As we walk through these, the real challenge for you and for me is to honestly ask, which one of these best describes me?
First up is what Jesus calls the path-like heart. I want you to picture a dirt path that's been walked on so many times it's as hard and compacted as concrete. The seed of God's word is scattered, but it can't even begin to sink in. It just sits right there on the surface, totally exposed.
This person's mind is like a 6-lane interstate with thoughts just rushing by constantly. There's no room, no quiet space, no real intention to receive anything deep. And because that seed of truth is just sitting out in the open, Jesus says the enemy comes and, poof, snatches it away. The result? This person never even gets off the starting block. They just stay stuck and completely unchanged.
The second type is the rocky heart. Now, this one is tricky because it starts out with so much promise. There's an immediate, joyful response. This is the person who gets totally fired up, feels all the emotion, and has what seems like a genuine spiritual moment. But right underneath that thin layer of soil, there's solid rock. There's no depth.
They get so excited at first, but the moment that following God actually costs them something, their comfort, a relationship, a habit they love, they get offended. They get mad. And when God doesn't meet their expectations on their timeline, they just quit. And what's their excuse? They blame God for being unfaithful. But Jesus says the real issue is their own spiritual immaturity, their own shallow foundation.
And now for the third condition, the thorny heart. For many of us, if we're being honest, this is the one that's dangerously relatable. See, in this soil, the seed actually sprouts. There is real spiritual life happening. The problem isn't that nothing grows. The problem is that everything grows.
The heart is already crowded. It's full of worry about the future. It's full of worldly desires. It's full of decisions based on money and ambition. Jesus calls these the thorns. And you'll notice, they aren't necessarily evil things. They're just other things. But they're competing for the same sunlight, the same water, the same nutrients, and they eventually just choke the life out of what God planted. And this person's faith, it never fully matures.
And that brings us to the fourth heart, the one God is looking for, the one that hell is absolutely terrified of. The good soil. This is the heart that doesn't just hear the word, it accepts it, it protects it, and it goes on to produce an incredible harvest.
So what makes soil good? Well, Jesus lays out three defining qualities. First, honesty, the courage to actually face the truth about ourselves even when it's uncomfortable. Second, humility, the ability to receive that truth without getting defensive. And third, patience, the endurance to hold on to what God has said, even when life gets hard and the harvest feels a long way off.
So here's a quick summary of what we've just walked through. The path-like heart is just indifferent and stays unchanged. The rocky heart gets that initial joy, but quits when things get tough. The thorny heart hears the word, but gets so distracted it just stays immature. But the good soil? It accepts the word, perseveres, and becomes fruitful. You can see how the final outcome for each one is completely different. All right, now that we understand the four conditions, we can finally get to the main event. Why did Jesus call this the master key? What makes this one single parable the hinge that everything else he taught swings on?
It's because this parable reveals the fundamental operating principle of God's kingdom. The seed, which is God's word, is never the problem. It is always perfect, it's always powerful, and it is always packed with the potential for new life. The seed itself never fails.
The sower, the person delivering the message, well, that's not the ultimate variable either. A message can be delivered by the most eloquent speaker in the world, or just stumbled through over a cup of coffee. But its effectiveness isn't ultimately about the messenger's skill.
And the Bible itself is never the issue. Its promises are never faulty. Its power never diminishes. In the entire spiritual equation of growth and transformation, there is only one variable, just one thing that changes from person to person.
So here's the bottom line. The heart is the problem, and the heart is the solution. The condition of our spiritual soil determines everything. It's the one variable that dictates whether the seed of God's word lives or dies inside of us.
And this just lays out the stakes perfectly. Think about all of Jesus' other teachings on prayer, faith, forgiveness, authority, purpose. Every single one of them is a powerful seed. But if the soil of your heart isn't ready to receive them, they cannot grow. If your heart doesn't change, nothing else will. But if your heart does change, everything will.
Now, it would be really easy to hear all this and feel kind of condemned, like you're permanently stuck with a thorny heart label. But Jesus didn't give us this parable as a final diagnosis. He gave it as a map for transformation. These are not destinies we're stuck in. They are stages we can move through.
You can actively cultivate a new kind of heart. If you recognize yourself as that hard path, the first step is just to acknowledge your own indifference. If you're rocky, you can decide today to persevere through the next offense. If you're thorny, you can begin the intentional work of pulling the weeds of distraction. You can choose to cultivate honesty, humility, and patience.
And this right here is the invitation. This is what's possible. It's not just about becoming a nicer person. It's about becoming the kind of person God can trust with the deep things of His kingdom, with real revelation, with genuine spiritual power, and with a destiny that changes the world around you. And the whole journey doesn't begin with some complex 10-step plan. It begins with one simple, honest, and powerful decision. It begins with a prayer.
The prayer is simply, Lord, make my heart good soil. And the Bible promises that's a prayer God is always, always waiting to answer. So the only question left is, are you ready to pray it?